Hello, well, a few of you have asked what's this red thing in the back here, and it's my homemade clicker press. And what I've done, I've taken a wheel bearing press and just very slightly adapted it for cutting out regular shapes of leather. So I'll show you a bit about how it works and what it's all about. First of all, though, let's just talk very briefly about clicker presses. So they're very useful if you want to cut out regular shapes, so like my little Bucklehurst acorns, or going larger, something like the base of a bag. They're great where you want to be able to cut things out fairly accurately and with a fair bit of speed as well. Now, I think if I had the space here, I would probably have a big industrial clicker, a big industrial sort of unit, but they do weigh an absolute ton, literally. I don't think my floor would really take it, and I'm not really got the space for it either. So for me, this is quite a good compromise at the moment. It's not too large, it doesn't take up too much space, but it does cut out repeatable shapes quite well. And maybe in a year or two I can find some other arrangement to use an industrial clicker. But for the time being, I'm happy with this, so I thought I'd share it and let you see how it works. So what I've got here, it's a wheel bearing press, and it's a substantial one. I went for a 20 ton. So this is like a 20 ton buttle jack here. And I've got steel plates and a poly mat. So the idea is you make up a cutter. Now you can get someone to make these up for you, or you can have a go at making your own. I have popped a film up on making one of these. This is something like my Mark III cutter now, and this particular one's for doing field notes. But I'll talk more in another film about how I'm now making these cutters, because I have sort of moved things on a little bit. But the idea is you can send off your artwork and get one of these made up, or you can make it yourself. So it's a very sharp, just like a cookie cutter, very sharp blade all around, and in this case I'm cutting a field notes case. So what you do is, I've got some scrap leather here, which will just show you the sort of principle of it. Lay your leather on the cutter. Got a poly mat here. So leather on the poly mat, cutter on top, and then your steel plate. And I'll bring the camera in a bit closer. So actually I've just brought this down a bit because I'm going to be using a thicker bottom plate here. I usually have it higher up, but this will show you anyway. So what I've got is a standard wheel bearing press, and this one was actually quite a tall one, as a floor mounted one, but I've just cut it down in height and I've bolted it to my workbench, so it's nice and sturdy there. It's a 20 ton hydraulic jack here, and the only real sort of modification I've made, I'll tilt the camera down, is I've put, let's take these out actually, it will show you more clearly. Right, this is how the press comes when it's been assembled. It's just ready for taking out your wheel bearings or whatever. So what I've done, I've got some fairly heavy duty steel plate, which I've just literally put on there. I really have kept this to a minimum. I then have a very thick poly cutting board. Now, I started out using ordinary just kitchen boards and they worked fine, but they do break quite easily. So I was lucky to be able to get a large bit of poly board. I haven't found a proper supplier of this, I just got it actually from another leather worker who was replacing part of their clicker press. So there's the poly cutting board. I have then, next goes in my cutter. It's a bit like a big sandwich, all of this. So I've got my scrap of leather on the cutter. It's a very flimsy bit of leather, but it will illustrate how this works. Leather goes in next. Another steel plate. And then I have this very thick block that came of steel with the press, and that goes in. So you got like a sandwich. Basically, your cutter will, as soon as you pump on this jack, your cutter will go through your lever. So just like using a regular bearing press or car jack, 3 or 4 pumps. You can hear it click almost. I think that's as good as in. I may give it one more for good luck. Yeah, probably heard that little noise. So that's hopefully cut it. Sometimes I have to move it in the press. Take it up a little bit. Remove the steel plates and see what the damage is. Yeah, I haven't got this totally leveled, but it will give you the idea. So there you have your lever shape cut. Hopefully you get the idea that I do need to just level up that bed, which I haven't done fully, but you end up with a regular lever shape. And the beauty of this sort of approach is that you end up with very regular corners, as long as your cutter, you know, is nicely done, but you're going to get very repeatable shapes, is what I'm saying. Now, obviously, having to load the lever in, the cutter in, the plates, pump, 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 release, that is going to take you, you know, a minute or two. But if you can cut out a very accurate shape, personally I think a couple of minutes work to get a very accurate repeatable shape isn't too bad. I know it's not industrial scale, but it's a lot quicker than cutting it by hand, and it's certainly a lot more accurate, and especially when you get onto some of the finer shapes. I mean, that's a bag base that I cut on it. Hopefully you can see that there. So again, you get a very repeatable, nice shape through thicker leather on that one. And obviously you can go to quite thick leather. Things like my little acorn tags for the bags, but obviously the press can do it with an appropriate cutter very easily. You can send away to get the cutters made. I'm now gearing up to make my own cutters just to have that flexibility. But that's all it is really. Regular bearing press, and pump it, down it goes, cutter gets forced into the leather, and hey presto, you have a leather shape. The steel plates that I'm using are about 8mm thick. Now I think that's an absolute minimum, because obviously you don't want them flexing and bending and then not being flat. So I think thicker rather than thinner there. And as you saw, I did use this big chunk of metal that came with the press to sort of like spread the load as well. If you think about one of these presses, the other thing I'd watch is the width going across, the throat if you like. This is a 20-inch as you measure across here between the two upright beams, so that means I can get a bit of leather 20 inches wide in there, move it around a bit and cut, or I could even cut a component that's 20 inches wide. So do watch out, because some of them are quite narrow, and that's fine if you're just doing very small things, but not so good if you're wanting to do large. And I guess that's another couple of things to say really. If you're just wanting to do things like wallets and, you know, tiny items, there are some very good, in the UK, the Lucas hand press. I think in the States you may be able to get Lucas, otherwise it's Weaver's hand press. There's a little like hand operated press. It's quite expensive, but it's very nicely engineered, very well made, and is certainly worth considering if you're doing things like wallets, you know, small items. This I think would be a bit of a faff for that. I think for things like bags, this is pretty good. But I think if you're doing wallets, I'd look at perhaps a little Lucas Weaver Supply type press, one of the, I think they go up to about 5 tons. They have a lever and a pull. Obviously if you're going industrial, you want an industrial clicker press, hydraulic, the works. So you take your choice, but if you're a bit like me, going for something a bit sort of in between in terms of bags, not being so worried about the speed of throughput but more concerned about the accuracy, then something like this isn't a bad sort of thing to be using. So anyway, hope you found all that useful. Ask away for any questions down below, and I have already popped up a film on making the clicker cutters, and in the comments on that film is the supplier. It's Partwell Group in the UK for the actual cutter die, but I will later on put up another film on making cutters in case that's of interest to some of you. Okay then, thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.